So now on to the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Around 1848-49, a group of young artists of the Royal Academy of Arts decided to form a brotherhood, an artistic brotherhood. This was something that was quite popular in the Victorian period, and the boys were very young. They were 20 or 21. There were 7 of them because they thought it would be symbolic, but not all of them were painters. Not all of them were even practicing artists. And you really need to remember 3 names: Dante Gabriel Rossetti, John Everett Millet, and William Holman Hunt. 3 of them painters, and they had long careers. The other brothers either emigrated or gave up painting altogether, or like Rossetti's brother William, they were in the original number, but they were not artists, but rather art critics or art historians. So we have to thank William Rossetti for being the chronicler of the movement, but he did not produce any paintings. So each of these artists had a different personality. They had a slightly different style and a set of favorite subjects. You can find a lot of materials online about them. I will give you some links to the documentaries. There was also biopic or a biopic TV series called Desperate Romantics, which shows the lives of the Pre-Raphaelites in a slightly humorous manner. If you haven't seen it and you would like to know more about their lives, it's quite interesting. And they started, as many young Victorians did, with writing a manifesto. And if you read the manifesto, it's quite funny, because it includes a lot of vague platitudes, like they would like to paint good pictures, or they would like to tackle genuine problems in their art. But what they really aimed for, and this is why they called themselves the Pre-Raphaelite, was to break away with the mainstream Victorian fashion in art, something that we'll basically discuss next week, which started developing after the end of Italian Renaissance. So they believed that Raphael was the last great painter of the Italian Renaissance, and after his death everything started to go wrong. Baroque especially was quite horrible, and the kind of art that was based on the studies at the Royal Academy, which was based on studying the old masters, mainly Baroque art, and not going outside, copying old paintings. They didn't like that. They didn't like that, even though, especially Millet was a very talented and very good student. I think he was the youngest ever student to be accepted to the Royal Academy. He was 11 at that time, so he's been a student for quite a long time, and already a well-established painter, let's say, when the Brotherhood started. So they were mocked. To the modern eye, their paintings do not really seem very shocking, but they were shocking. You'll see some examples in a little moment, but they found relatively early on, after the first exhibition together, They found a supporter in the person of John Ruskin. I mentioned him, I think, already. A very important art critic and art historian, the man who was responsible for the popularization and preservation of the legacy of Turner. And now he got interested in their art and he started to support them and write very positive reviews of their paintings. This was a troubled relationship. The portrait of Ruskin, which you can see in the presentation, is the famous or rather notorious portrait that Millet painted of him while wooing his wife, which ended in a rather scandalous divorce, or rather the annulment of marriage, because 5 years after the wedding, Mrs. Ruskin could obtain a medical opinion that she was still a virgin. This was a massive scandal, but luckily for Effie Ruskin, she was granted the annulment and she could marry Millet, and then they had like 7 or 8 children together, so definitely they consummated the marriage. Then Ruskin had a closer relationship with Rossetti, and Rossetti's then wife, Lizzie Siddal, a very important model for the Pre-Raphaelites. We'll talk about them in a little while. Ruskin tried to make Rossetti his protege, and he tried to teach him even. Didn't really work that well. But he never really backtracked on his support for the movement. And if we look at some examples, there are lots of examples of Pre-Raphaelite art. It used to be very unpopular, like 30 years, 20 years ago. It was unfashionable, and the Pre-Raphaelites were not really treated with respect. They were a kind of Victorian curiosity, nothing more. But in the last 15 years, maybe 20, they regained their position. There were very many important books and exhibitions of their art, so now they are quite popular. Many British members of the audience say this is their favorite movement in British art, so they are quite popular. So let's now look at some subjects in their art, and the first subject I chose are the religious paintings, or the paintings with some elements of religion. And here we have 3 paintings by the 3 leading artists of the movement. So Dante Gabriel Rossetti, the Girlhood of Virgin Mary, John Everett Millet, Christ in the House of His Parents, and William Holman Hunt, The Finding of Our Savior in the Temple. So the scenes from the youth of Virgin Mary and 2 scenes from the youth of Christ. So if we look at the Girlhood of Virgin Mary, we see a young girl learning to embroider, to make an embroidery. The girl was modeled from Rossetti's own sister, the poet Christina. The older woman who teaches her, who models for Mary's mother, Saint Anne, is actually Rossetti's own mother, and the male figure in the background, Mary's father, Saint Joachim, was a family friend. There is also a little angel in the background supporting the lily from which Mary is embroidering the flower on the tapestry, on a piece of fabric. And this painting was accompanied by a poem written by Rossetti. This is something that he would do quite often. He was quite a good poet as well as a painter. he used the technique or kind of, well, medium, which is sometimes called ekphrasis, which means the combination of the visual with the poetic. So he would write poems describing his paintings, and he would paint the works illustrating his own poems. You'll see another example as well. So we have the poem explaining the symbols, at least some of the symbols from this painting, and if you look at it, it's actually full of all the symbols connected with the cult of Virgin Mary, such as the lily symbolizing virginity and purity, and the rose and the vine and other plant symbols like the thorn for suffering of Mary when Jesus was crucified. There are some interesting additions, like the fact that Mary is actually behaving like a pre-Raphaelite painter herself. So she is sketching, or in this case embroidering, from nature. So something that the pre-Raphaelites would do themselves. They would go out and work outside. They were probably the first, or one of the first artistic groups to actually do that. Rather than do some preliminary sketches and work in the studio, they would go outside and paint outside from nature. The truth to nature was something very important to them. We also have those big volumes on which the vase holding the lily is supported, and these volumes are all marked with titles bearing the names of the cardinal virtues. So of course there is a symbolic meaning here that the innocence of Virgin Mary is not really her nature, but it's the result of deliberate action, perhaps even study. She knows everything there is to know about the virtues, and she chooses to be such a holy personage. There are even some interpretations of this painting which bring to mind the similarities between Virgin Mary and other Victorian women. So she is enclosed by a curtain within the home sphere. This alludes perhaps to the Victorian concept of the division of the spheres. So the man is working outside in the garden, and the women, here Saint Anne and the teenage Mary, are at home in the female sphere. There is, you may want to Google it, there is a second part. It was supposed to be a three-part work, a triptych, but Rossetti finally finished only two parts of his story of Virgin Mary. The second part is the Annunciation, when the angel, much bigger and much more muscular than the child here, comes to Mary's room and announces that she will be the mother of Christ. And it's Christina Rossetti again, looking terrified, looking like a terrified, perhaps even molested Victorian girl. So it's quite a powerful painting, and something that was never done to a religious subject, at least in British art. And a similar thing happens in Millet's early painting, Christ in the House of His Parents. He is so true to nature that he does not idealize his models because they are supposed to represent holy persons. So some early critics, including very famously Charles Dickens, were quite shocked by the fact that, to them at least, Mary looked ugly and emaciated, that Christ looked ugly. He looked like a red-haired brat with dirty feet. So how can you paint Christ as a child with dirty feet and not looking dignified and strong and beautiful in the idealized way? So this was a very controversial painting because of the length that the artist took in being true to nature. So much so that he went to a local butcher's shop to buy the sheep's head to model for the flock of sheep in the background, and he sketched the arms of Saint Joseph from a real carpenter that he knew, to make sure that these were the real arms of a working carpenter. So their muscles, their ligatures were exactly the way they would develop after many years of working in a wood shop. So that's it. Here you have those young artists. And the third member of the group, William Holman Hunt, was perhaps the least experimental, at least here, because probably he was the most devoutly religious. He was a very devout Christian of the Protestant denomination, so his take on the use of Jesus is very Protestant, because if you look at the scene, here we have a very famous scene from the Bible when Jesus went missing in Jerusalem, and after 3 days Mary and Joseph found him in the temple talking to all the wise men and priests of the temple. So this is precisely this moment, and this Jesus looks healthy and strong and, as some critics said, very English, which was a positive thing. Even though William Holman Hunt, when he decided to paint some religious paintings, the first thing he did was to book the passage to the Middle East and to go to the Holy Land and to paint from nature. So most of his religious paintings were actually based on the studies he made in today's Israel. So he would study the costumes and the monuments and anything that he could find to make it more realistic and more believable. But at the same time, there is a lot of symbolism, and the most important piece of symbolism here, you will need a good quality copy of this painting to notice that the old priest, the old rabbi who holds the Torah, the Old Testament, the holy text, he's actually blind, so he cannot read it. This is, I would say, a point of criticism towards the Catholics and other Christian groups for whom the priests were very important, and reading the Bible yourself was less important than, let's say, organized celebrations. For the Anglicans, as many other Protestant groups, personal piety and moral life were the most important aspects of religion. And definitely this is what William Holman Hunt believed. And if we look at 2 more of his religious paintings, you will see that. And they were actually painted as serious, as a duet, showing 2 aspects of spirituality: religious and moral. So the first one of the most famous and most popular Victorian paintings ever in history, The Light of the World. It again shows Jesus Christ, but this is a nighttime scene, and Jesus is with the lantern knocking on the door. This is very symbolic. Of course, the door is the door of the human soul, and Jesus brings the light of salvation. This is really focusing on the personal devotion, personal relationship with God. The funny little story about this painting is that the body of Jesus was once again modeled on Christina Rossetti. So the face is male, but the body apparently is that of a young woman. And the other religious painting is the Awakening Conscious. And this is something more controversial because this is not visibly a religious scene. This is a scene from modern life showing a woman springing up from the lap of a man who plays the piano. And there are lots of symbols in this painting. It's absolutely, well, it's very typical for Victorian paintings, and the Pre-Raphaelites are no better. These paintings can be actually read like short stories or poems. They are stuffed full with little meaningful details and symbols, and everything means something. And it's very true about the Pre-Raphaelites. If you're interested, you can find these paintings perhaps in the museums when they are displayed, and you can read the explanations detailing all those little things that can be found there. But the most important thing in the Awakening Conscience is, of course, that this woman is a fallen woman. She is perhaps not a prostitute, but a mistress, a kept woman, definitely not a wife. We do not know whether this gentleman has a family somewhere, which was a common occurrence in Victorian society, but definitely this woman is not his wife. And the fact that she is in her nightgown, that she is undressed, that her hair is loose, suggests that they are very familiar indeed with each other, so that she is his lover. And the title, The Awakening Conscience, it refers to what happens here. She springs up from his lap because she understands that her life was sinful and she wants to change it. So it's just like the same moment when Jesus is knocking on the door of the soul, but this time there is no Jesus, there's just personal realization of this young woman that she wants to change her life, and we do not know whether she will be successful. There is a very ominous symbol on the carpet beneath the table. There is a little bird, perhaps a wounded bird, trying to escape the clutches of a fat and happy-looking cat. The cat is ready to kill the bird and eat it, so we do not really know whether this woman will be successful in changing her life. Knowing anything about Victorian culture, probably not. We know at least what inspired her to rethink her life. And this is very cleverly shown in the painting because this is reflected in the mirror in the background. We see that she's looking straight out the window, and outside there's a beautiful spring day with lots of sunshine, with lots of greenery, and she sees nature itself reviving, and she wants to revive her soul. Before we move on to the next part, two more images by not a member of the Pre-Raphaelites but a close friend of the movement, Ford Madox Brown. And they both look like religious pictures, but they are not religious pictures. They both show images of mothers with small babies. One is unfinished, so we only have the unfinished version. The title says it all: Take Your Son, Sir. And we have the woman posed as Madonna with baby Jesus. But she is again a fallen woman, a prostitute or a kept mistress. If you look at her face, she looks very unhealthy. She looks consumptive. She looks feverish. She's probably dying. but she wants to save her child by giving him to the father. And if you just glimpse at this painting, you will think probably that behind her head there is a halo, like the saints have in paintings. If you look closer, it's a mirror once again, and reflected in this mirror you can see a very startled image of a man who is probably the sir whose son is being presented. And the other one is also the image of a woman with a baby. The title is quite interesting in itself, The Pretty Bar Lambs. It's kind of silly title, the kind of language that a mother would use to a small child. But then again, it shows actually Brown's own wife and his daughter. But you cannot really see whether the baby is male or female. It could be both. So the woman looks once again like Madonna with the baby. And the lambs, of course, are very important religious symbol. And there is a servant gathering grass, probably to feed the lambs, but she is on her knees as if she is in prayer. So what we have is the great Victorian idealization of the mother figure, of motherhood, as something that brings a woman to the position of an angel, of a Madonna, and that can even save the soul of a fallen woman. So I would say that being a mother, being a caring mother, is the way that women are supposed to repent for the sin of sex. And we continue in a moment.